The name Bach, it's basically synonymous with classical music, right? But the story here, it isn't just about one guy. It's about an entire dynasty, a family that, for generations, literally was music.
But here's the thing that's just wild. The real mystery we're going to dig into today. How does a composer we now consider one of the absolute pillars of Western music get so completely forgotten that he basically disappears for the better part of a century? I mean, how does that even happen? So check out this timeline. It really shows you just how big this mystery is. Bach dies in 1750, and his incredibly complex style is already considered a bit behind the times. Then, pretty much nothing, for almost 80 years. It's not until 1829 that this young kid, Felix Mendelssohn, brings Bach's music roaring back to life. So what happened in that huge gap, and what was it that brought him back?
Well, the answer starts way before our main character was even born. We have to go back to a time and a place where the Bach family name was so common among musicians that the word Bach literally became local slang for musician. Think about that.
To really get the Bachs, you have to get your head around this context. In 18th century Germany, being a musician wasn't some lofty artistic calling. No, it was a trade, a hereditary craft, passed down just like being a blacksmith or a baker. If your dad was a musician, chances are you were going to be one too. The Bachs just happened to be ridiculously good at their family business.
The whole tradition starts with this amazing little image, a guy named Weitbach, a baker, who's playing his instrument to the rhythm of his grinding mill. How cool is that? And from that super humble beginning, the family's musical identity just exploded. They even held these annual reunions, which were basically musical networking events where they'd share jobs and, of course, make music together. They weren't just a family, they were a full-blown musical institution.
And all of this entire legacy, it all kind of funnels down and culminates in one person, Johann Sebastian Bach. He wasn't just some singular genius who popped out of nowhere. He was the product of this incredibly deep family tradition, and he would become its great synthesizer.
Now, his career, man, it was not a smooth climb to the top. He was constantly butting heads with his bosses in Arnstedt. He was literally thrown in jail in Weimar for a month just for trying to quit his job. Can you imagine? Then he found his groove in Cothen, writing these instrumental masterpieces before finally landing in Leipzig, where for 27 years he cranked out an almost unbelievable amount of sacred music.
And this is where you see what made him a total genius. It wasn't just about pure invention. It was about synthesis. He was like a master chef, taking all the best ingredients from around Europe. He grabbed the rhythmic energy of the Italians, the fancy ornamentation of the French, and he blended it all with the dense, serious musical tradition of his own German homeland.
The absolute heart of his music was this thing called counterpoint, the art of weaving multiple independent melodies together into this perfect harmonious whole. He took this ancient art form and, well, like this quote says, he perfected it to a level that, frankly, no one has ever surpassed. Not since.
But here's the twist, and it's a big one. J.S. Bach achieves this perfect synthesis of the complex Baroque style at the exact moment the musical world decided it wanted something completely different. This created a huge challenge for his heirs, his 4 sons, who also became composers.
This comparison just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have Dad's music, complex, dense, deeply religious. And on the other side, what the kids were dealing with. The new galant style. Think elegant, simple, light, and catchy. It was a total vibe shift, and the sons were caught right in the middle of it.
And each of his composer's sons, well, they all handled this pressure differently. You had Wilhelm Friedemann, the gifted but troubled son who just couldn't escape his father's shadow. Then Carl Philipp Emanuel, the crucial bridge to the next era. You had Johann Christoph Friedrich, the steady craftsman. And finally, Johann Christian, the Londoner, who just went all in on the new sound.
We have to pause on Carl Philipp Emanuel, or CPE Bach, for a second. His music was a big deal, for sure, but his famous book, it was an absolute game changer. His essay on keyboard playing became the textbook, the Bible for the next wave of geniuses. We're talking Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, they all studied it. CPE was literally writing the instruction manual for the new classical era.
And then you have the youngest son, Johann Christian, who moves to London and becomes a legit superstar. And this is where the story gets just unbelievable. In 1764, he meets an 8-year-old prodigy named Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Picture this. They sit at the keyboard together, trading musical ideas, finishing each other's sentences, but with music. That one encounter was pivotal. J.C. Bach's light, elegant style became a foundational influence on Mozart. It's a direct line from the Bach Dynasty to the next great genius.
So, with the world moving on, and even his own sons writing in a totally new style, how on earth did Johann Sebastian's music survive it all? Let's get back to that central mystery. How did he go from being nearly forgotten to being, well, immortal?
Honestly, the flame was kept alive by a very, very thin thread. His son, CPE, was like the family archivist, making sure his father's work was preserved. A few dedicated superfans, these connoisseurs, collected his manuscripts like rare treasures. And those manuscripts eventually made their way to composers like Mozart, who studied them like crazy and started weaving Bach's complexity into their own music. It was basically an underground music scene for a dead composer.
79 years. Just let that number sink in. That's an entire human lifetime. For 79 years, the work of arguably one of the greatest minds in music history was just sitting there, gathering dust, known only to a handful of experts.
And then came the earthquake. This 20-year-old conductor, Felix Mendelssohn, takes this massive gamble and stages a public performance of the St. Matthew Passion. And the audience was just stunned. It was a complete revelation. This single concert launched the modern Bach revival and brought his music back to the world, this time for good.
So the result of that long, winding journey is pretty profound. That family name Bach, which once just meant musician in some little German region, had now become the shorthand for the highest possible standard of musical artistry in the entire Western tradition.
It leaves you with a really fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? Fame is fickle, tastes change. What great artist from our own time, someone we might think of as old-fashioned or maybe too complex today, are we overlooking? Who's just out there waiting for their own revival a century from now?